Well, hello AP US History students. This is Mr. Ippolito, and I'm going to share with you some insights for Unit 3, because I know you're getting ready for your Unit 3 exam coming up very soon. So let's go ahead and get started. I want to first of all thank Ori Bryan for preparing this presentation for us. Outstanding organization. Thank you very much. And thank you to all of the students who prepared these slides, because this makes it a lot easier for all of us. By the way, you can find this presentation. It's called Unit 3 Collaborative Presentation. It's in the digital file cabinet under Unit 3 if you want to go back to any of these slides as you're studying. All right, let's go ahead and begin. Starting with Chapter 9. First of all, the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom. The Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom was the document that one of the documents that Thomas Jefferson was most proud of. It helped to set up the idea of religious freedom when we include that in the Bill of Rights. In the First Amendment, we have the two parts of the First Amendment that establish both freedom of religion, the ability for people to practice whatever religion they want, and then also the Establishment Clause. You see right here, we have the no established or official church in Virginia. An established church is a church that is paid for by taxpayer dollars. Thomas Jefferson believed that people should have the right to worship freely, and that Americans should also not be paying taxpayer dollars to support a particular church. And so these two ideas that all started with the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, thank you Thomas Jefferson, they ended up finding their way into the Bill of Rights that was ratified in 1791, just 3 years after the original Constitution was ratified. So that's why this is important. Let's move on. Next slide, Republican motherhood. Thank you, Tyler, for this slide. Republican motherhood was this idea of civic virtue, this notion that women are an important part, not that they were willing to give women the vote yet, but that women were an important part of the survival of the United States because they were the ones who were responsible for educating children. And they were the ones who were responsible for spreading virtue, good citizenship, good behavior. When we say Republican motherhood, it's Republican with a lowercase r, as you see right here. Lowercase r Republican, having no connection to the modern Republican Party or even the Democratic Republicans back in the, back during that time period, but rather Republican as in contributing to a healthy republic. And a republic is a representative government, a government chosen by the people where representatives are chosen to represent the people. So Republican motherhood meant that while women did not yet have full voting rights in the United States, and they won't get full voting rights until 1920 with the passage of the 19th Amendment, women were still viewed as having an important role to play in the development of Republican virtues, democratic virtues, and values in the United States, in the early United States. All right, the Articles of Confederation. We're going to spend the next few slides talking about the Articles of Confederation. So just to go beyond just this definition slide, obviously you absolutely need to know that the Articles of Confederation were the the original framework for our government that was established during the Revolutionary War. We needed something to create sort of a makeshift government. It was an incomplete government, though. The Articles of Confederation were not an effective enough document for the long term. They were fine to keep us together during the time of the American Revolution, but once the Revolutionary War was over, we needed something more. So let's go into a little bit more depth. There were challenges, and thank you, Taylor, for this, challenges of the critical period. We talked before about how this time period, 1781 to 1789, is considered the critical period in American history. Were we going to survive or not? Now, this line here isn't entirely accurate. We did have a central form of government. We did, and that was the Articles of Confederation. However, it wasn't a very strong central form of government. So this statement would be true if we just put the word strong in there. We lacked a strong central form of government. Congress could not collect tax expenses. That is true. Congress could only request from the states tax money. Well, if you make taxes optional, who's going to pay taxes. Not many people are going to pay optional taxes, and that held true during the period of the Articles of Confederation as well. Each state had its own type of currency. Delaware dollars, Massachusetts dollars, Georgia dollars, Connecticut dollars. You can imagine how confusing that is when every state has a different currency and you have to exchange $1, one type of money for another whenever you cross state lines. That can be confusing. That was another challenge. Economic challenge just for trade among the states. It was hard. I don't know what this statement means, but it was hard to create a strong central government. And part of the reason why it was hard, I mean, we have to give the founders a little bit of leeway here. They were just escaping. They were just rebelling against a strong central government. And so you can see how reasonable it is that they wouldn't want to create a new strong central government to replace the strong central government that they had just escaped from. So at the time, states' rights were very important to them. And so I guess it made sense in the short term to give states much more sovereignty, much more independence, and to create a weak central government of the United States. No executive branch, that's true. The judicial branch left to the states. There were state courts, but no national court system. This is going to be a problem because eventually there will be conflicts that arise between, from one state to another. Trouble passing laws. Yes, you needed a vote of 9 out of the 13 states in order to pass a law. That's a difficult, that's like a 3/4 majority just to pass a law. Today in our country, we just need just a simple majority, 50% plus 1, in order to pass a law. 50% plus 1 in the House of Representatives, 50% plus 1 in the Senate, plus the president signs. That's the way the system works today under the Constitution. Back then, really difficult to get a 3/4 majority to agree on anything. And then in order to pass an amendment to the Articles of Confederation, you needed a 13-state unanimous vote. And how often does every American agree on anything? That's never going to happen. And so basically, as a result, the Articles of Confederation would never be amended. And I'm sure that was the purpose built in there by some of the writers of the Articles of Confederation, was that they didn't want it to change. They didn't want the federal government to have more power. Finally, Congress had no power to raise an army during peacetime. That's another challenge of the critical period. When an enemy is going to attack, it's very difficult to all of a sudden raise an army. It's much more practical to have that army trained and ready to go. But why were the people, the Americans of the 1770s and 1780s, so leery of a standing army? Well, because standing armies those were the British armies that were marching into Boston. Those are the British armies, the British troops that were in New York. They were suspicious of a standing army because it was a standing army that was taking away their rights when they were colonies. So they didn't want a repeat of that. And so that's why they didn't want a standing army during peacetime, but you need a standing army that's ready, that's prepared at a moment's notice if a country attacks. You need to be ready to go. And that was a problem of the critical period. There were two big successes that we can point to as successes of the critical period. Number one would be the handling of Western lands, and good job to the Congress in the 1780s for doing the right thing when it came to the handling of Western lands. You see these lands right here. They could have remained colonies of the 13 original states, but instead they set up a system where these lands could by themselves become equal states to the other original 13 states. You see here, ceded by Connecticut, owned originally by Virginia, by North Carolina, by Georgia, by Massachusetts, by New York. Vermont was jointly, I want to say, almost fought over by New York and New Hampshire. And so the smart thing that they did was with the handling of Western lands. First of all, they ceded all of this land to the government of the United States for eventual new statehood. And then let's go through. First of all, there was the Land Ordinance of 1785, which really should come before this slide, but we'll talk about the Northwest Ordinance. And thank you again, Ori Bryan, for the fancy animations here. Here is the Northwest Territory. Today, when we think of the Northwest, we think of Oregon or Washington. But that's the Pacific Northwest. That's the Northwest of our country today. Back then, this was the Northwest because our western boundary was the Mississippi River and our northern boundary was Canada and the Great Lakes. So this is the old Northwest right here. What are we going to do with this land? Well, smart Smart Second Continental Congress. Thank you for thinking of the Northwest, creating the Northwest Ordinance. 3 parts, chartered a government in the Northwest Territory, actually created a system by which you could start out as a territory. So you could start out as Illinois Territory, Indiana Territory, Ohio Territory, and then you could transition to statehood. Only territory, yeah, okay. Created a method to admit new states into the Union. Exactly right, that's very good. Adding new states rather than expanding old ones, and I like that point, thank you. Listed rights guaranteed in the Northwest Territory, and the most important of these, and I don't know, yes, slavery is illegal. I'm not sure what this means here, but what I can tell you is that for the very first time, slavery is outlawed by Congress, and that's going to be an important precedent to set, because the Northwest Ordinance says that slavery is not allowed in any of what will become the 5 full states of the Northwest Territory. That's Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, and then a little part of Minnesota as well. Slavery is completely outlawed in all these zones. So that's going to be an important first step in the eventual abolition of slavery. So this is, when abolitionists point to like milestones of the abolition, the getting rid of slavery in the United States, this is an important first step here. All right. Weaknesses of the Articles, that was actually a lot of what we talked about during the challenges of the critical period, so I'm not going to go over these again. Shays' Rebellion. So Shays' Rebellion, the reason why I mentioned Shays' Rebellion, and somebody pointed out in our review session that we had after Connect to Success Day, that why are you bringing up Shays' Rebellion when Shays' Rebellion was in the last unit? Well, yes, Shays' Rebellion was in the last unit, technically, but the reason why I mentioned Shays' Rebellion now is because we want to contrast it with the Whiskey Rebellion. So Shays' Rebellion was a riot by farmers, unpaid war veterans, exactly, dealing with foreclosures, exactly right. They were protesting high taxation, the governor's high salary, high court costs. Basically, they were trying to shut down the court system in western Massachusetts because they didn't want their farms to get foreclosed upon. And they were protesting because if they would have gotten paid, oh, and there's a video you can watch there as well. Thank you, Diane Cho. They were upset because they wouldn't be foreclosed upon if they would have gotten their payments as veterans of the Continental Army, because they proudly served in the Continental Army during the American Revolution. If they would have gotten paid, their argument was, then they would have been able to make these farm payments. The reason why Shays' Rebellion is so important, and especially in contrast to the Whiskey Rebellion, is because Shays' Rebellion showed the weakness of the federal government. The federal government was unable to have any kind of response. They had no standing army because it was peacetime. We weren't at war with another country. And so the difference you see in Shays' Rebellion versus the Whiskey Rebellion is under the Constitution, a strong federal government is able to quickly put down the Whiskey Rebellion. The federal government at the time, under the Articles of Confederation, was not able to do anything about Shays' Rebellion. Look at this date. This is important right here, January 1787. When did they begin the Constitutional Convention? Just 4 months later, in May of 1787. Shays' Rebellion was really the last straw that finally led into the Constitutional Convention, because the Founding Fathers said, you know what, this is ridiculous. This kind of thing, Shays' Rebellion, should not happen. We need to make sure that it doesn't happen again. All right, Constitutional Convention. You can watch this video, and thank you, Madison, for including that. Really, just factually, you need to know. We're going to go into some of the details of the Constitutional Convention in future slides. It was in Philadelphia. It was in 1787. Good, important for you to know the chronology. And let's go to some future slides here. Hamilton's role in the Constitutional Convention. He was advocating for a strong central government. Very true, yes. Gave a 5-hour speech about giving the wealthy class a permanent share. Yes. Alexander Hamilton, you see the roots of the Federalist Party right now during the Constitutional Convention. Alexander Hamilton was even arguing, I know it doesn't say it on the slide here, but he was arguing for a president for life because Alexander Hamilton, I think, was a little bit of a monarchist. Again, he liked law and order, strong central government, and so he was willing to pretty much replace the British king with an American king, president for life. Many of the delegates at the Constitutional Convention thought that Hamilton's plans were a little too conservative. But let's move on. Roger Sherman. There he is right there. the most important thing, and I don't see it mentioned here, most important thing about Roger Sherman is he comes up with the idea of the Connecticut Compromise. He's from Connecticut, comes up with the idea of the Connecticut Compromise, or now we call it the Great Compromise, because you had two different plans. You had the Virginia plan, which was the large state plan, and then you had the New Jersey plan, the small state plan. Virginia plan, and I think there's a slide coming up in a little bit, Virginia plan said that representation in Congress should be based on population. And so that would benefit the large states like Virginia, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania. The small states said, hey, what about us? We're going to get, our voice is going to get drowned out if you have representation based on population, because, states like New Jersey or, states with less of a population, even Georgia, which is larger in area but had a smaller population, their voice is going to get drowned out. Well, here's the compromise. The Connecticut Compromise, came up when Roger Sherman spoke. I'm having trouble speaking right now. Connecticut Compromise said, let's have a little bit of both. Both of these systems, we can create a fair system. So let's create a Senate that has equal representation for each state. So a state like Rhode Island, a state like New Jersey, a smaller state, can have the same level of representation as a big state like Virginia or Pennsylvania. And then we have the House of Representatives. That will be the People's House, and that will be based on population. You look at the House of Representatives today, and a state like Wyoming that has the same amount of people as if you combine the Santa Clarita and the Antelope Valleys together. That's how many people live in the entire state of Wyoming. It's not a very big state, population-wise. Wyoming has 1 member of the House of Representatives. California has 53 members of the House of Representatives. So we're a big state, and we're properly represented in the House of Representatives. But in the Senate, California gets 2 votes, just like Connecticut, just like Wyoming, Idaho, Rhode Island, North Dakota. Everybody's still equal today in the Senate, just like they were back when the Great Compromise or the Connecticut Compromise was created. So that's why I wanted Roger Sherman to be included in this discussion, because of his contribution of the Connecticut Compromise. Moving on. Gouverneur Morris, an important man at the Constitutional Convention, and wrote the preamble to the Constitution. James Madison wrote most of the text of the Constitution, but Gouverneur Morris was responsible for the preamble. I'm moving on. Patrick Henry's view of the Constitutional Convention, he was suspicious of the Constitutional Convention, and so that's as much as I'm going to say. James Madison, he was considered the father of the Constitution. He wrote he wrote the text of the Constitution. He wrote most of the text of the Bill of Rights as well. So James Madison, for his work on the Constitution, we call him the father of the Constitution. And James Madison will come up again as president. We'll move on from here. The Rising Sun Chair, it's a beautiful story. It's not going to be, honestly, it's not going to be on the test though. So I'm going to move on just for the sake of your study time. Okay, the large state plan I've already discussed. The small state plan I've already discussed. We ended up coming up with a compromise. Yes, good. All right, and then this is the Great Compromise, which I've just discussed. So we're moving on. And we have a video. Not sure what that video is. It's loading. What are we loading? Oh, going back. All right. Perhaps I need to just reload this presentation. We are back. Okay, so trying to work through the technical difficulties. For some reason, 3/5 compromise, the slide was not loading, so I just had to move right beyond it. But I will mention to you that the 3/5 compromise, can I go back? No, see? 3/5 compromise, which hopefully will appear on your presentation. 3/5 compromise was the compromise that was reached between the northern and the southern states during the Constitutional Convention, because the northern delegates felt that it was unfair. The South should not count their slaves as people for the purpose of representation, because they didn't treat them like actual people. They didn't treat them like human beings. They certainly didn't treat them like citizens. They treated them like property. And so why should you be able to count them for the purposes of representation if you're not even treating them like people and they're not even really being fully represented? The South was trying to argue, obviously, the opposite point, and they wanted to count their slaves for the purposes of representation. And so they came up with a compromise, and they said that each slave, for the purpose of representation, will count as 3/5 of a person. It's a totally ridiculous notion, and it completely dehumanizes the slaves, at least if they would have gone completely all one way or all the other. You could at least make an argument for not counting them at all because you're not giving them any rights. You can make an argument for counting them fully because they're human beings. But to try to divide them up just seems to dehumanize the slaves even more. But anyway, that was the compromise that was reached between the northern and the southern states during the Constitutional Convention. Getting on to the rule of law. The rule of law it's a simple concept. It's this idea that no one is above the law. I love the quote from Thomas Paine's Common Sense. He said that back in the old world, back in England, the king was the law. And here in America, we want to create a country where the law is king. And I love that quote because I think it speaks very high. It speaks very clearly to this concept that no one, no leader, no president, when we create our Constitution, no one is going to be above the law. Everyone will have to follow the law, and that's called the rule of law, that principle. All started, by the way, I see here English Bill of Rights. I think that position, that concept, I would trace all the way back to Magna Carta, back in 1215. The document that first limited the power of the king, King John. I think that I could point to as the beginning of this concept of rule of law, that no one is above the law. Okay. Oh, and we're loading. All right, let's see if we can go back and record this way, since the other way isn't quite working. Limited government. It's that same concept that began with Magna Carta, the idea that that not only is no one above the law, but we have to have a limited government. We cannot have a government with unlimited power. And especially after our experience being in the British Empire and being colonies of the British Empire, we especially valued this concept of limited government. Separation of powers, checks and balances. This is another thing, and you can check out the video here. Another thing that is built into the Constitution is the idea that we separate. It's from Montesquieu. Thank you, Montesquieu. The idea that we should separate out the powers of the national government into an executive branch, a legislative branch, and a judicial branch. And checks and balances is this idea that each of those branches should be able to have checks against the other. If you ever watched a hockey game, and you'll know what a check is. A check is when one player runs up against another player to stop their progress, to prevent them from, going all the way down the length of the ice. That's a check. In government, a check is when it's sort of that same concept, but with the branches of government, where you run into another branch of government that you think is getting too powerful, or that's going too far, that's getting away with too much. That's checks and balances. Federalism. So federalism is this idea that we have a federal system of government. A federal system means that the national government has some powers, and then the state and local governments have some powers. And then there are some powers that they share. This is a great Venn diagram that illustrates that. So here you have the powers of the United States government, for example, a military. California does not have an army or a navy that's reserved to the United States government. Only the United States can declare war. The United States has the power to establish a postal system. One thing that it doesn't say in here is the currency power. Again, that was a problem under the Articles of Confederation, to have all of these different states with different currencies. Under the Constitution, under our federal system of government, we have one currency for the entire United States. And then there are some things that only states have the power to do. Set up schools, for example. That's all regulated by the states. Make regulations for marriage. So you don't get a United States marriage license. You get a marriage license in the state of California or Nevada or Mississippi or wherever you are. The states also establish voting procedures. Voting is a little bit different in every state, and that's because the Constitution gives the states the power to set up how people are going to register to vote and what the exact voting requirements are. And then finally, there are shared powers. Obviously, collecting taxes is something that every level of government can do and does very happily, because they need to fund themselves. Regulating banks, we have federally chartered banks, we have state chartered banks. Governments at both levels can borrow money. The national government is very good at borrowing money. We are so good. We're currently $16 trillion in debt. That's how good we are at borrowing money. Providing for the general welfare. So we have both state and national programs that are designed to help people in need, punish criminals. So law enforcement, we have both the national government and the state governments have law enforcement. The states, I think, do a little bit more when it comes to law enforcement, state and local agencies, LA County Sheriff's Department. They also are responsible for safety. LA County Fire Department, they keep us safe from fire. But the national government also has law enforcement agencies as well, such as the FBI or the U.S. Marshal Service. Those are both agencies that can track down and prosecute criminals who commit federal crimes. So that's the system of federalism. Getting on to, okay, good, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. These are the first political parties in America. The Federalists were led by Alexander Hamilton. We did a whole thing in class on the difference between the Hamiltonians and the Jeffersonians, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time. Actually, I think you should be the one spending the time to make sure that you go over each of these so you know the difference between those who supported Hamilton and those who supported Jefferson. I will point out that the Federalists were called the Federalists the entire time, ever since the ratification debate over the Constitution. The Anti-Federalists, the Jeffersonians, they were called Anti-Federalists during the time of the ratification of the Constitution. Once the Constitution takes effect and Hamilton becomes Secretary of the Treasury and Jefferson becomes Secretary of State, the Anti-Federalists are then going to become the Democratic Republicans. So really they're only called the Anti-Federalists during the ratification debate. They finally come up with a better name for themselves. So I'm not going to go through all of these. We did a lot of this in class, so I'm going to leave that to you to make sure that you understand the differences between those who supported Hamilton and those who supported Jefferson. The ratification debate, again, just to summarize, the Federalists wanted a strong central government. The Anti-Federalists were supporting states' rights. So you should know the differences, again, between those two factions. Federalist Papers. I do want to, we didn't mention this in class, so I do want to bring up a couple of, three actually, noteworthy papers among the Federalist Papers. The Federalist Papers were a series of essays that were arguing for the ratification of the U.S. Constitution, is what this should say, U.S. Constitution. And let me spell it right. The essays were written primarily by James Madison. James Madison, it makes sense because he was the author of the Constitution. James Madison is going to switch allegiances. James Madison is going to start out as a Federalist. However, he's going to, because he was such good friends with Thomas Jefferson, he's later going to become a Democratic Republican. But right now, James Madison is very much a strong Federalist. It's his Constitution that he mostly wrote, and so he is supporting the ratification of the Constitution. The Federalist Papers were also written by Alexander Hamilton and John Jay, but James Madison is the primary author of the Federalist Papers. So here's the argument. First of all, Federalist 10, which I think is probably the most famous out of all the Federalist Papers. Federalist 10 argues for it warns of the dangers of faction, and just like George Washington warned of faction, Federalist 10 warns of faction. But it says that, and it doesn't quite say it here in this slide, so I'm going to mention it. The Federalist 10 says that we need a constitution because we need a system by which majority factions cannot take away the rights of minority factions. And Madison argues that a constitution is a great way to protect to guard against the tyranny of the majority. Because when you have a strong central government, that is what helps look out for the little guy, basically. I'll give you an example. In the South, in the 1950s, the white Southern majority was very happy to continue the policy of racial segregation in the South. African Americans in the South were a minority, and as a result were being discriminated against, and there was no way there was not going to be any remedy at the state level. No one was going to. There was no way that that problem was going to be fixed at the state level. The majority in the South in the 1950s was in favor of continued segregation. Governor George Wallace had his very famous speech. You'll learn about when we get to the learning about the 1950s. He says, "Segregation tomorrow, segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever." There was no way that that was going to be broken within the context of that political system. But because we had a constitution, because we had separation of powers, because we had a strong central government, the Supreme Court was able to review the policy of segregation using their power of judicial review. And then in the Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954, they were finally able to start to break down that system of segregation and declare that segregation was illegal. That happened. I'm going to argue that happened because we had a good constitution. And Madison's argument in Federalist 10 is, let's look out for the little guy, and the Constitution can help protect the little guy against the tyranny of the majority. Federalist 51, checks and balances, and Federalist number 78 talks about. Let me shrink this down a little bit. Federalist number 78 talks about the court system and how it's important to have an independent judiciary, a strong independent judiciary in order for a national government to be strong. It argues that the federal courts have the duty to determine whether acts of Congress are constitutional and to follow the Constitution. Yeah, so basically Alexander Hamilton in Federalist 78 is saying this is why, one of the reasons why we need the Constitution is because we need a strong national, an independent national judiciary, because that's going to help keep the balance. And so those are the arguments. Those are my top three. Federalist papers would be Federalist 10, Federalist 51, and Federalist 78. Okay, let's go ahead and let's move on to Chapter 10. I've already been speaking for half an hour, and so I think I need to speed things up a little bit. So I'm going to start speeding things up. Here we go, Chapter 10. George Washington, a good man. Alexander Hamilton, again, you should know that he was our very first Secretary of the Treasury. You should also know about the whole difference between Hamilton's views and Jefferson's views and the two political parties. I'm going to keep going. Jefferson, again, the same thing as Secretary of State. His role is primarily going to be as the leader of the Democratic Republicans. The financial plan. All right, I'm going to slow down just a little bit, just long enough to let you know that Hamilton's financial plan is important. It's important, especially for this test, that you understand Hamilton's financial plan. Again, I've already been talking for half an hour, so I got to speed things up. But please make sure that you study in depth Hamilton's financial plan, including the Bank of the United States. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, that's the elastic clause. The reason I wanted to include this is because Alexander Hamilton is going to cite the elastic clause as the reason why, the phrase necessary and proper, that Congress should have the power to make all laws which are necessary and proper for the carrying out of the powers that are given to them in the Constitution. This phrase, this necessary and proper phrase, is the elastic, just like a rubber band. Alexander Hamilton wants to stretch the powers of the national government. He wants the national government to be as powerful as possible, and so that's where you come up with this idea of the elastic clause. That's why the necessary and proper clause is the elastic clause. It's stretchy. Okay. Loose versus strict interpretation. Again, this goes right back to Hamilton versus Jefferson. Loose interpretation, that's Hamilton. Hamilton wants the Constitution's rules, limitations of the government to be interpreted as loosely as possible. Jefferson wants a strict interpretation of the Constitution. All right, again, Federalists versus Democratic Republicans. Already talked about that, and you should already know about that. Moving on. The French Revolution. How does the French Revolution affect the United States? Well, I think the French Revolution is going to bring about conflict between France and Britain, which we're ultimately going to get sucked into. And then also the French Revolution ultimately will bring about the rise of Napoleon, and Napoleon is going to be a key in the Louisiana Purchase. So we'll talk about the Louisiana Purchase in just a little bit. But you need to know that we, We inspired the French Revolution. The American Revolution inspired the French Revolution. The French Revolution is then going to affect American history going forward, and so we'll talk about that more as we get to those particular examples. Neutrality Proclamation. This is issued by President Washington. Jeffersonian Democratic Republicans want to join the French in the French and British War. Well, it's in the Napoleonic War. I just don't want this to be confused with the French and Indian War, which was way before. It was, ended 30 years before this. On the other hand, Alexander Hamilton wanted to join the British side. Yes, President Washington knew that the war would be a disaster and chaos, so he issued, yes, good. This stated the United States should not join or get involved with anything that involves the war between the French and the British, the Napoleonic Wars. Good, good, and good. All right, continuing. The Battle of Fallen Timbers. This was, so led by General Mad Anthony Wayne. Good, the American Army managed to stop the terrorizing Miamis. That has nothing to do with Florida. This is the Miami Indian tribe in Ohio. The American Army managed to stop the terror. Yes, the British, who supported the Indians, terrorism. I would call it terrorism in the modern sense of terrorism, but Indians attacking American outposts in the Northwest Territory. I would call it that. Decided not to protect them as General Wayne attacked, so the Indians decided to create peace, which ended up in the creation of the Treaty of Grenville. Washington managed to avoid violence with not only the Indians, but also Britain keeping America neutral and safe. Okay. Basically, what I can add to this slide is that the Treaty of Grenville is going to be the high point. It's like the high watermark of Native American power in North America, or in the land that is going to become part of the United States. After the Treaty of Grenville, it really is just the Native Americans getting taken advantage of over and over and over again. And so the Treaty of Grenville really marks the last time that the Native Americans have any kind of power or negotiating power whatsoever with the American government. Jay's Treaty was an agreement between the U.S. and the English. A joint commission was set up to resolve disputes along the border. England also agreed that they would abandon their forts on the western frontier. This treaty limited trade affiliation with other places. That it was a treaty to help strengthen the relationship between the United States and Great Britain. The problem with this is that there were a group of people in the United States who did not want to strengthen the ties with Great Britain. Those were the Jeffersonians. They would become the Democratic Republicans. So I think Jay's Treaty, I think the biggest thing to come out of Jay's Treaty is the fact that this is when we really have, I want to say this is when political parties begin. I'm gonna make that bold statement. The Federalists really split apart from the Democratic Republicans. It's not just two groups differing. It's now two groups in America who have definite policy differences over a specific piece of legislation. A treaty is like a piece of legislation. It needs to be ratified by the Senate. Ultimately, it was ratified by the Senate, and in large part because George Washington threw his support behind it. President Washington threw his support behind it, and so it was easily ratified in the Senate. But this really drove a wedge between Federalists and Democratic Republicans. This is when, I'm going to say, political parties officially begin in 1794, not in 1974. 1794. With Jay's Treaty. And again, these two numbers should be transposed. All right, let's move on. Washington's Farewell Address. We read Washington's Farewell Address in class. Retired after serving 2 terms. He set the precedent of retiring after 2 terms. Good. In his farewell address, he advised against long-lasting alliances, favored temporary alliances. Good. He wanted to avoid being dragged into a larger conflict, only wanted America to be in a good. Okay. I would also point out, not included here in the slide, but I would also point out that in Washington's farewell address, he also warns against faction. He warns against the dangers of political parties, which, of course, by then, he gives his farewell address in 1796. By then, it's too late, and really the political parties had solidified by that point. Pinckney's Treaty defined borders of the U.S. and Spanish colonies. Pinckney's Treaty is not significant in and of itself right now. But I want you to just remember Pinckney's Treaty because it's going to be one of the things that helps define the boundaries of our nation, helps define the boundaries between New Spain and what will eventually be United States possession of the Louisiana Purchase. So let's not worry so much about Pinckney's Treaty right now. We will worry about it when we talk more about Manifest Destiny and how the United States added land, starting with the Louisiana Purchase. Election of 1796, the first contested election in our country. All right, folks, so it's already been 40 minutes. I'm going to try to speed this up a little bit more. That gives you more time to focus on the study of the things that I'm telling you, really need to be focused on in more depth. Let's get back into the election of 1796. This is the first contested election. In other words, the first time that there are two political parties that are going up against each other. As you can see from this image right here, Jefferson versus Adams, there can only be one. And in fact, this was, like I said, the first contested between two parties. There could only be one. Please note that this is before the 12th Amendment. The 12th Amendment is the amendment that made it so that finally we have the system that we have today where you vote separately for president and vice president. But at the time, the way the old electoral system worked, each elector got 2 votes, one that they could cast. Well, they could cast it for any candidate they wanted to, but the elector, the person that got the most electoral votes would be president, and then the person who got the second highest number of electoral votes would be vice president. So in this particular case, it just so happened that Adams got the highest number of electoral votes, and Jefferson got the second highest number of electoral votes. So Adams became president. He was a Federalist. Jefferson became, he got the second highest, so he became vice president. This is obviously not a very practical system. If President Obama, for example, were to win the 2012 election, but Paul Ryan were to, or excuse me, let's say that Mitt Romney were the runner-up, it would be very challenging to have President Barack Obama, Vice President Mitt Romney. That would be a challenge because they come from 2 different political parties and because they spent the whole campaign beating each other up. So now that we have the 12th Amendment, that's much better. I think we're going to see the 12th Amendment slide coming up real soon. Yes, here it is. That's going to make life a little bit easier politically, so that you vote. Each elector gets 2 votes, one that they cast for president and one that they cast for vice president after the 12th Amendment passes. Okay, John Adams. When Adams became president, the war between the French and the British was causing great difficulties for the United States. True. John Adams' administration focused on France, where the Directory had refused to receive the American. Yeah, okay. Sent 3 commissioners to France, but in the spring of 1788, word arrived that the French Foreign Minister Directory had refused to negotiate. All right. Yes, basically, the Adams administration centers around conflict with France and the political ramifications that had back at home. So I'm going to skip 12th Amendment. I just talked to you about. Undeclared war with France. French warships seized defenseless American merchant vessels. True, because they were infuriated by Jay's treaty. President Adams sent 3 envoys to France to avoid the war. Became known as the XYZ affair, which we're about to see that slide. Even though Americans called for war with France, Adams remained neutral. Like Washington, he knew a war would spell disaster. Absolutely. An undeclared war, mostly confined to the seas, raged for 2.5 years, where American ships captured over 80 armed French ships. So the conflict is building. XYZ affair, Franco-American, yes. France would negotiate without a $250,000 bribe. Basically, these guys, these unnamed French officials named X, Y, and Z, were the ones that were demanding tribute. And so, so this is where this phrase, I don't know if you saw it in the book, but this is where the phrase "millions for defense, but not a penny for tribute" comes in. France basically wanted us to pay tribute, to pay a bribe to speak with the minister of France. So we basically had to pay money if we wanted to negotiate, if we wanted to have a diplomatic conversation about the relationship between France and the United States, and we were not going to have that. At the time, again, the Federalists are in power. Federalists are pro-British, and so this nearly led to an all-out war with France. Instead, we don't have all-out war, but we do have the Alien and Sedition Acts. The Alien Acts were designed to limit immigration, specifically French immigration into the United States. The Federalists at the time were worried that French immigration into the United States would lead to more Democratic Republicans and would lead to obviously more political opposition for them and more pro-French feelings, and that's exactly what they did not want. Also, the Sedition Act took away freedom of speech. You know, and it says here freedom of speech and freedom of the press from the aliens. No, it's actually freedom of speech and freedom of the press from all Americans, specifically those who were speaking out against the Federalists. So that's important to understand. It took away freedom of speech and freedom of the press from anyone who dared oppose the government, basically. And so you can imagine that if the Federalists are in power, then the people who would be opposed to this would be the Jeffersonians, the Democratic Republicans. Because basically what's happening is the Federalist Congress passes the Sedition Act, and it limits the ability to speak out against the government. Again, the Federalists are in control, and so it's basically limiting Democratic Republican speech. And so, as a reaction to the Alien and Sedition Acts, we have the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions. Kentucky and Virginia resolutions written by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, speaking out against the Alien and Sedition Acts. The point that I really want to drive home, my personal feelings on this, I don't get personally involved, but I think it was important for Jefferson and Madison and the Democratic Republicans to speak out against the Alien and Sedition Acts, particularly the Sedition Act, because it was wrong and I think it was anti-American. It was certainly unconstitutional. The Democratic Republicans, when they gain power after Jefferson's election, they're going to repeal the Alien and Sedition Acts. And so it's important to speak up for free speech and for freedom of the press. That's important. However, Jefferson and Madison took it to a dangerous extreme because they start introducing this thing called compact theory. It's this idea that when we wrote the Constitution, there were 13 sovereign states that were all entering, rather than entering a union according to this theory, which I disagree with. The compact theory says that it was 13 separate states, sovereign states, each with their own power, that agreed to give up a little bit of their sovereignty for the common good. And to me, I feel like when you start talking about that, when you start talking about nullification, because really Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, they were saying that we should be able to nullify the Alien and Sedition Acts within the borders of that particular state. That's dangerous because, and I'm glad that Timothy included this, they were both big advocates of states' rights, yes, and then later this same argument is going to be used by Southerners, not only at the beginning of the Civil War. Timothy, I'm going to capitalize Civil War for you. Not only is this argument used for secession, but it's an argument that's also used during the debate over the Tariff of 1828. We're going to learn about that when we learn about Andrew Jackson and the tariff debate, the South Carolina crisis over what they called the Tariff of Abominations. I don't believe that states should have the power to decide what federal laws they're going to enforce within their borders and which ones they're going to ignore. In order to have a strong country, you need to have states that give up some of their sovereignty. So I guess in that regard, I'm a little bit more of a federalist. But Jefferson and Madison are arguing for this compact theory. And again, that's dangerous because I believe that compact theory is what's going to help lead us down the road ultimately to secession and ultimately to the breaking apart of the Union during the Civil War. Okay. That's it for Chapter 10. We're going to move into Chapter 11. I'd like to keep this whole thing under an hour. I have 12 minutes left. All right. President Thomas Jefferson. Big thing I want you to focus on is President Jefferson's 1801 inaugural address. We read it in class, but we didn't really talk about it that much. I want you to go over it. I want you to read that article by Joanne Freeman. You got the Joanne Freeman article. I want you to look over that again. I want you to look over it carefully because I want you to see what Joanne Freeman's arguments are. What she's trying to say about the election of 1800. Was it what was it all about? I want you to study that. Was it really a revolution? I want you to think about that and think about, again, reading that Joanne Freeman article. If you lost the article that I gave you on paper, you can get another copy in the digital file cabinet in Unit 3. But I want you to think carefully about the revolution of 1800. Why was it a revolution, and what was that all about? Jefferson's inaugural. It was a speech based on democratic beliefs. Yes, it stated the common good. We are all Republicans. We are all Federalists. It's Jefferson's attempt to try to bring the country back together. And this is what happens so often, is we have such bitter partisan fights between the two political parties. We fight, but then there are times when wise leaders like Jefferson, I think this was a wise thing to do, says we are all Republicans, we are all Federalists. Again, trying to unite the nation. It's been a bitter political fight. The election's over. It's now an inauguration. Let's try to bring the country together. I think, because here's my prediction, I believe that President Obama will win re-election in 2012. I think that Obama's second inaugural is going to speak a lot about unity, because our country has been tearing more and more apart over a lot of different issues. But I think he's going to appeal to national unity, which is the same thing that President Lincoln did. He appealed to national unity in both of his inaugural addresses. I think that President Obama is going to try to follow in Lincoln's footsteps and in Jefferson's footsteps in appealing for national unity. Chief Justice John Marshall, the thing that I want you to focus on the most is Marbury versus Madison, the power of judicial review. Again, I'm going to try to speed this up here. Marbury versus Madison, so important. I need for you to understand that case. The Barbary States, again, it's a great story, but I'm going to be honest with you, it's not going to be on the test. But I'll tell you that the Barbary States, those were those North African states that we were fighting against during the early 1800s, during Jefferson's presidency. That's also, just really quick story, that's where we get the Marine Corps hymn, that from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, that one. That's the song of the Marine Corps. The halls of Montezuma refers to the Mexican-American War, which we haven't learned about yet. The shores of Tripoli. This is one of the very first times that the United States Marine Corps, hoo-ah, Semper Fi, U.S. Marines, saw action in another part of the world, was in Tripoli, the shores of Tripoli. That's basically referring to North Africa in our fight against the Barbary States. Okay, moving on. Louisiana Purchase, thing I want you to focus on the most. We're going to talk about more, we will talk more in our next unit about the territory and about how the Louisiana Purchase changes the landscape of America. We'll talk more about that in the next unit. But what I really want you to focus on right now with Louisiana Purchase is a couple of things. First of all, why did Napoleon sell? Napoleon sold in part because of the revolution in Haiti, the slave rebellion in Haiti, led by Toussaint Louverture. Also, Jefferson's justification. This is good here. Jefferson, at first, on the surface, may look like a hypocrite, because on the one hand, he was all about small, limited government. He feared strong central government. He feared the presidency having too much power. And yet, Jefferson, not only does he double the size of the United States, but he also vastly increases the power of the presidency, because Jefferson, just single-handedly using the treaty power, he doubles the size of the United States. And he says, well, it's because I was signing a treaty. That's how I was able to make this huge, humongous real estate purchase. There's somebody wise who said that we, and I forget who it was, who said that we act with our hearts and we justify with our heads. We act with our hearts, we justify with our heads. I think Thomas Jefferson is justifying the purchase when he says, well, it's my treaty power and that's in the Constitution, and so that's fine. But why, if you were to get to the heart of why Jefferson really wanted, why did Jefferson vastly increase the power of the presidency? And I think it's because of his vision, Jefferson's vision of an agrarian America with yeoman farmers. And if you're going to have yeoman farmers, citizen farmers, you need land for those farmers. And Jefferson saw that our nation was expanding. And so if you're going to have, let's go to the next slide, if you're going to have a nation of farmers, you need land for those farmers to farm on. And so that, I think, is Jefferson's, that gets to the heart of why Jefferson wanted to make the Louisiana Purchase. It wasn't to expand the power of the government or expand the power of the presidency. I think his real reasoning was to see out his vision of an agrarian America, an agricultural America. Lewis and Clark, they traveled to the Pacific, and we'll talk more about them in our next unit, so I'm going to flip and flip. And Sacagawea, we'll talk about her more in the next unit as well. Aaron Burr scandal, it was scandalous. All right, again, I'm just trying to hit the heights. It's such a great story, and I'm moving on. American involvement in Napoleonic Wars. American forces sided with the French against the British in the War of 1812. Okay, but we didn't ally with them. I just want to be clear that we did not have an alliance with France. No alliance with France. We just didn't like the British, just like the French didn't like the British. The War of 1812 is between the United States and Britain. France was not directly involved. France was fighting against Britain separately in the Napoleonic Wars. French and American navies banded together to fight. Yeah, okay, but this is in the Napoleon. This is not prior to the... Yes, okay, good. We were allies. That was during the Revolutionary War. All right, I'm going to go ahead and skip this slide. We're moving on. The Chesapeake incident. Seizure and search off the coast of Virginia. Commander expected the British deserters might be aboard. Yes, this incident was a violent factor. This is one of the things that pushed us into the War of 1812. A series of trade restrictions introduced by Britain to South America. Yes, the British military were supporting American Indians. Yes, offered... Okay, that's not quite, the slide isn't quite done. Is there something behind this picture? Oh, there we go. Expansion of the American frontier. Good. Basically what I want you to know, we're talking about the causes of the War of 1812, and I want you to make sure that you understand the causes. The Chesapeake incident, where the British Navy seizes the American ship, the Chesapeake. Just know that this is one of the causes of the War of 1812. Let's move on. How much time do I have left? I've got 3.5 minutes. I got to go quick. Embargo Act. Okay, what I'm going to tell you is I want you to understand the difference between the Embargo Act, the Non-Intercourse Act, and Macon's Bill number 2. I need for you to understand the difference between each. It's very possible, not 100% guarantee, but it's very possible that this Oh Grab Me cartoon may appear, I'm just saying, might appear on a future test that you might see. So I'm just letting you know that. So please just know the difference between Embargo Act, Non-Intercourse Act, Macon's Bill number 2. And this is another great story. Both of these men died on the same day, on the 50th anniversary of the adoption of the Declaration of Independence. Both John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. I just want to let you know this really quickly, they were bitter enemies. They started out as allies during the Revolutionary period, both helping to write, Adams helped Jefferson to write the Declaration of Independence. Once the country got started, they were bitter enemies. After both men left the presidency, they became friends again, and they started writing letters to each other. And both of them, Adams and Jefferson, died on the same day, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. It's just a beautiful story. Okay, moving on. James Madison becomes president after Thomas Jefferson. It's going to be Mr. Madison's War. Madison is going to be president during the War of 1812. Important for you to know about the War Hawks. Please know, when we're learning about the causes of the War of 1812, the War Hawks were the members of Congress who really wanted to go to war in the War of 1812. So please know the War Hawks. Okay, now we're in Chapter 12. The Great Lakes campaigns. This is all War of 1812. There's not going to be a lot of battle history. I'm just being honest with you, not a lot of battle history. This is a great story. Francis Scott Key in the Battle of Fort McHenry. This is where our Star-Spangled Banner came from. Lindsey Coons, I'm just noticing now that you've got blue and then red and white stripes. I love it. Love it. This is where this Battle of Fort McHenry in the War of 1812 is where our national anthem comes from. The burning of Washington, D.C. Our nation's capital was burned during the War of 1812, burned in 1814 by the British. Music, awesome. Treaty of Ghent, this is the treaty that ends the War of 1812 and was signed. This is kind of the irony. I don't know if we have a slide for the Battle of New Orleans. But it's funny because you'll see here the treaty was signed December 24th, 1814, Christmas Eve, 1814. The biggest and most successful battle of all for the Americans in the War of 1812 actually took place in January 1815. That was the Battle of New Orleans. And so news travels slowly. And so if you have a treaty that's signed, it could take up to 6 weeks to cross the Atlantic to, from Belgium, because that's where Ghent is, to let people know that, hey, the war's over. And so obviously Andrew Jackson did not find out about that in time. That was fine because Andrew Jackson was happy to get revenge against the British. Very, very happy. Really important thing, and I want to slow down just a little bit. We're getting close to the 1 hour mark, and we're almost done with this presentation, but I need for you to know about the Hartford Convention. The Hartford Convention happened during the war, right at the end of the War of 1812. The Hartford Convention, the New Englanders, the Northeasterners, were saying, being the most rebellious of the colonies, wanted more rights. Really, let me be more specific and say that the New England colonies were upset with the war against Britain. They were the ones who were losing trade. They were the ones who were pro-British, and so the War of 1812 hurt them. This looks like a picture of the Battle of New Orleans right here, so I'm not quite sure why that's there. But, when the message arrived, Jackson had succeeded at New Orleans. Okay, now, and the Treaty of Ghent was signed, making the Federalists look traitorous and pathetic. Okay, good. Caused the slow end of the Federalist Party? Absolutely. If you were going to point to what happened, basically they're saying that if this War of 1812 doesn't end, then we might even secede. And it's weird to think, of course we think of secession, we think of the South, we think of the rebellious South during the Civil War, but actually the first people in America to talk about secession were the New Englanders during the War of 1812. This becomes a black eye for the Federalists. It makes them look whiny. It makes them look traitorous and pathetic, just like Timothy said here. Good. Hartford Convention is going to be the beginning of the end of the Federalist Party. So that's what I want you to know. War of 1812, causes and effects. Good. Resent. Yes. Americans angered. Yes. Western members of the House want to expand into, how about we call that Canada? Effects, heroism of Jackson, yes, especially Andrew Jackson, good. U.S. proves it could defend himself against the British, yes. We basically fought to a draw, we fought to a tie, but the United States proved that, we whooped Britain the first time, and we were able to defend ourselves against the British a second time. So even though we didn't gain anything, we gained self-respect, we gained... We fought to a tie that time, and against insurmountable odds. We should not have won the revolution. We won it. We should have lost the War of 1812 because Britain is so much more powerful, and we fought to a tie. So for us, that's kind of a victory for us. This is important also. Loss of trade during the war encourages growth of American manufacturing. That is another really important effect of the War of 1812. Because our biggest trading partner, we were at war with them, Britain, and because it was tough to trade on the Atlantic with any other country because we were at war with Britain, the biggest naval power on earth, we had to come up with more creative ways of getting manufactured goods, and that was by buying American manufactured goods. So in the end, the war was good for American manufacturers, and it proved that Americans could do it. Americans could make our own stuff, and that was good. The American system, I want you to take a look at the American system because I'm running out of time. It basically a program of internal improvements proposed by Henry Clay, and I'm going to make this font a little bit smaller so it'll all fit nicely on the page. Good. So know the American system. I want you to know Henry Clay, the era of good feelings, good, Wildcat Banks, and settling of the Old Northwest. We already talked about that. Okay, I'm running out of time, so I want you to just focus on these Civil War these Supreme Court cases, McCulloch versus Maryland, Dartmouth College v. Woodward. Where are my other Supreme Court cases? Marbury versus Madison. I want you to know about that as well. I'm not sure where Gibbons v. Ogden went, but I want you to know that also. And perhaps that slide never got created. Let me just point out really quickly what are some other things. We'll just kind of fly through the rest of these. The Adams-Onis Treaty, honestly, I'm not going to put that on the test. I'm going to talk about that when we talk about territorial expansion. Latin American revolutions we talked about in class. This was the source material. This is the reason why we had the Monroe Doctrine. Okay. So there were countries that were rebelling against Spain, and because we had so many brand new independent countries, this is a great map. Thank you, Emily, for finding this map. 1811, 1822, we've got 1821, 1825, 1811. You see all of these countries are rebelling. Mexico, important in 1821. All these countries rebelling in the first 20 years of the 1800s, and that is going to prompt, that's going to be the reason why we have the Monroe Doctrine. It's President James Monroe saying, on behalf of the United States, saying to the people, to the countries of Europe, you need to stay out. It's like a big warning sign. It's us asserting ourselves as kind of like the big brother of all of the rest of the Americas, saying that, basically saying the time for colonization of the Americas is over. Okay, you've had your chance, Europe, and colonization is now done. Do not interfere with these fledgling democracies. We are going to be the protectors of these new democracies. Some of the new countries were more or less democratic than others, but still, we wanted to establish ourselves as the dominant nation in the Americas, and all the rest of you European countries can just back off. Russo-American Treaty, we'll talk about that when we talk about territorial expansion, Panic of 1819. I'm not putting that on the test. But you should know that it is the first major American depression, economic depression. We talk about economic history, we'll get more into that. Missouri Compromise, I would like for you to know the Missouri Compromise. And the Treaty of 1818, again, we're going to get into that when we get into territorial expansion. So that's it. Good luck studying, and good luck on the test. Thank you.